We recently discovered a new podcast from our friends at Heb Media. Hosted by the Gefilteria co-founders Liz Alpern and Jeffrey Yaskowitz, Meet Me at the Deli is a food advice podcast from two of the world's foremost experts. Every episode, Liz and Jeffrey, and often a guest, answer listeners' burning questions about Jewish cooking, deli culture, and the nouveau shtetl lifestyle. Tune in every other Thursday wherever you get your podcasts and submit your questions at podcast@gefilteria.com for the chance to hear Liz and Jeffrey answer them on the show. Again, that's Meet Me at the Deli. Find it anywhere podcasts are found.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 540, AJWS and Global Responsibility. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Miriam Terlin-Champ, and today I am not just Executive Director of Judaism Unbound. Today, I get to serve as host for this episode of Judaism Unbound because we're engaging in a conversation that I'm really passionate about. What do we owe people we'll never meet? It's a question that feels increasingly difficult to answer. In this moment, when many of us are overwhelmed by the crises close to home, when our political imagination seems to shrink towards protecting our own communities and our own families and our own futures, the very idea of global responsibility can feel distant, impractical, or even naive. And yet, what if the opposite is true? What if the problems that we imagine belong to somewhere else are already shaping our lives? What if the boundaries between their struggle and our struggle are far more porous than we realize? In this episode, we're joined by Elizabeth Richman and Joannine Nanyange of American Jewish World Service, an organization working alongside grassroots movements across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Together, we explore what dignity looks like in practice, why solidarity matters in an interconnected world, and how ordinary people learn the courage to stand with their communities whose lives may seem far removed from their own. Along the way, we wrestle with a powerful possibility that caring for people beyond our immediate circles isn't a distraction from our well-being, but one of the deepest expressions of our humanity. But before we dive into all of that conversation, we have a few Judaism Unbouncements we'd love to share with you. Lex, can you share with us what's new at Judaism Unbound?
Yes, happy to. First things first, as this episode is being released today, it's June 19th, and we have a gathering of Shabbat Unbound today. So head to JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat if you'd like to attend. We'll be diving into the prayer Elohai Nitzor from the Friday night Shabbat service. It's also part of other services, but that's the focus of it for us. And we would love to see you there. Shabbat Unbound is a chance to connect with other Unbounders, learn about a prayer, hear it in different melodies, learn its history, all sorts of good stuff. And it's one of our favorite parts of Judaism Unbound's calendar. So again, head to JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat to register if you're listening on June 19th. If you're listening later than that, still, you can head to that same link and you can register for future Shabbat Unbound gatherings. So we will have more chances to connect and learn about prayers in July, in August, and beyond. So JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat is the place to go. Also, we wanted to give a shout to encourage you to subscribe to this podcast feed. We haven't mentioned that in a while, but it helps our show a ton when you click that subscribe button, whether it's an Apple Podcast, Spotify, whatever you use to listen to your podcasts. It goes a long way towards helping others find the show. And we think that now's a perfect time because not only does subscribing to this feed get you access to Judaism Unbound, our flagship podcast, it also gets you access to all sorts of other podcasts in our family of podcasts now. So that includes Rest to Return, hosted by Kashira Halev Fife, Shabbat Unbound, which is in podcast form in addition to Zoom, and you get that here in our podcast feed, and soon to come many other podcasts. So don't hesitate. Right now, head within whatever podcast app you're listening to this in and click that subscribe button, click that follow button. It's different language sometimes for different apps, but we would love for you to be a subscriber. And now, Miriam, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Lex. And now a bit more about our guests today and the organization that they represent. When I was in rabbinical school, I thought all kinds of things affected my education and my perspective and what I would do later on with that degree. And the most impactful thing I did outside of my educational space and the chaplain space was to take a trip and then to be mentored and supported by American Jewish World Service. It is truly an incredible organization. So let me get into their bio. American Jewish World Service is the leading Jewish organization working to fight poverty and defend human rights in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. With support from the American Jewish community, AJWS funds nearly 500 progressive grassroots human rights organizations and social justice movements around the world. And these groups are fighting for the rights, autonomy, and dignity of women and girls, LGBTQI plus folks, indigenous communities, and other minority populations. These partners are fighting for democracy and civil rights, defending land, water, and natural resources, and much, much more. AJWS is truly unique in that they don't just fund these organizations. AJWS has local human rights experts in every country where they work who accompany their partners and help them grow, evolve, and collaborate. AJWS also leads advocacy campaigns here in the United States, uniting the voices of Jewish Americans, including thousands of clergy and rabbis to speak up for foreign policy that stands up for human rights abroad. And maybe most unique is that AJWS reaches outside our own community. All of AJWS's partner organizations support non-Jewish communities around the world. We are joined by Joannine Nanyange, pronouns she, they, who is an attorney with over 13 years of leadership experience in the field of sexual health and rights. Her legal background spans grassroots legal advocacy to global grant-making, giving her a unique perspective on the needs and the movements AJWS supports. As the director of AJWS's sexual health and rights team, Joannine leads a portfolio of 7 countries, supporting grassroots movements advancing the rights of women, girls, and LGBTQI communities. She is also widely recognized as a trusted thought leader in the African sexual health and rights landscape. Elizabeth Richman, she, her, leads AJWS's Jewish engagement team, working with American Jewish clergy, community leaders, and institutions to advance AJWS's mission. Before coming to AJWS, she spent 13 years in executive leadership at Jews United for Justice. Ordained at JTS, Elizabeth is actively involved in the work of Jewish Social Justice Roundtable and is a senior fellow of the Shalom Hartman Institute. She currently serves on the steering committee of Interfaith Power and Light and previously served as the co-chair of the DC Jobs with Justice Board and as a member of the Interfaith Worker Justice Board. She's also served on the Rabbinical Assembly Social Action Commission, the Resolutions Committee, and the Rabbinic Career Development Commission. Joannine, Elizabeth, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
It's wonderful to be here.
I'm a longtime fan of your work, both as individuals and also in the greater scheme of the institution. 20 years ago, I was very interested in the work, and it was my dream in rabbinical school to go on an American Jewish World Service trip. And I waited and I waited and I waited. And I wanted to go to Senegal because it was French-speaking. And I remember landing in Dakar and seeing all these different rabbinical students from different seminaries, different streams of Judaism, and we all got into this rickety truck, and it was night, and we drove for a very long time, and so the group who didn't know each other started to sing, and they sang in all these different choruses, and they're repeating each other, and there was different parts, and it was the first time I had been in a pluralistic Jewish environment, the first time I'd really been exposed to different kinds of Judaism in one space, in a country I had never seen before, and it was this dual perspective shift that was happening, both sort of my own independent identity, not just as a Jew or as at that point, prospective rabbi, also as a white person in this land, and also as someone who spoke a language that was a colonial language in that space. And as we sort of drove deeper into this country that felt more and more different, I felt like both heart and mind were expanding at the same time. And I had always assumed I'd be changed by the work, but in that moment, I really started to get it. And since then, I've stayed in touch, and I've been on several different trips and opportunities with your work. And each time I have found that both my curiosity has grown, but also my perspective has continued to expand. So the work has always been amazing, but I want to say first the impact on me. And I'd like to hear a little bit about the work of American Jewish World Service and then, of course, the direct impact that we're seeing in country. So, Elizabeth, could you start just by sharing a little bit about who you are and also what you do at American Jewish World Service?
Absolutely. So I've been at American Jewish World Service for 3 years, and I lead what's known as our Jewish engagement work. And I sit on the advocacy team, and I'll tell you a little bit about what AJWS does and why we have an advocacy team. But my job is to engage people like you, Jewish communal leaders, rabbis, cantors in the work of the organization, because we know that the experience that you're talking about, that kind of experience of going and really seeing and being somewhere that is outside of our regular everyday experience, is just transformative in how we think about ourselves as humans, as Americans, as Jews, and then how that translates from experience into action. So AJWS is a really unique organization, which you know because you've traveled with us. You were a beloved part of our last cohort of rabbis. And what AJWS does is that we work to fight poverty and defend human rights in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And we're responding to urgent global issues like the rise of authoritarianism, the climate crisis, the persecution of women, LGBTQ folks, humanitarian disasters. And we do that by supporting hundreds, nearly 500 organizations doing social change work on these 3 continents. But then there's this component where here in the United States, we mobilize the power of the Jewish community to advocate for American policies and international policies that protect human rights. So we have this dual focus of supporting organizations and activists on the ground and making sure that we here in the U.S. context are using the power that we have to advocate to support those folks. And I would say that the content of what we're fighting for and these groups are fighting for fall into I think 4 or 5 different buckets. First one is really defending the rights and dignity of women and girls and LGBTQ folks. And that can look like defending reproductive rights, fighting for gender equality, combating domestic violence. And second piece our organizations are working on are safeguarding freedom and democracy. We know that's especially important right now, supporting human rights defenders as they speak out and demand free elections and a free press, and they fight rising authoritarianism. Other partners that we work with are fighting climate change and protecting the environment. And still others are working on combating racism and xenophobia and ethnic persecution so that marginalized groups and religious and ethnic minorities can live without fear of violence or discrimination just because of who they are. And then to top it all off, we also respond to disasters. And we aid communities in the wake of devastating earthquakes or hurricanes or epidemics. And maybe even more importantly, we support communities in their efforts to build resilience and prepare for the future. And what's interesting, well, many things are interesting about it, but I will say that our supporters are primarily members of the Jewish community, but our work is not specifically focused on the Jewish community. Our work involves people of all races, religions, and ethnicities around the world. So that's a little bit about AJWS. It's actually a lot about AJWS.
That's perfect. That's gorgeous. Joannine, you're someone on the ground doing this work and also in a higher level work too. Can you tell us what brought you into the work?
I got interested in social justice work, as it were, when I was at university in Uganda. I am Ugandan. I'm based in Uganda. I'm doing this call while in Uganda. So I was in law school in Uganda and in I think our first year of law school. So law school in Uganda is like 4 years and then you do the back course. So in my first year, we had some of these teachers and professors that were teaching around constitutionalism and human rights. And it was all very interesting stuff, right? And it was happening right after Uganda had passed its first Anti-Homosexuality Act. And that was such a big debate in the country. It never made sense to me why it was such a big debate in the country, but it was. And so when I went to law school and it was one of the things that we were talking about, I got interested. I was like, this is very interesting. But I think making the decision to actually join the space was in my 3rd year of law school. And what happened was there was this class that we offered, that we did or took at law school. It was a very small class. They were very strict about who they had met. And they used to bring in experts, so to speak, from the field to come and teach us. So we didn't have conventional teachers because they were teaching us to be public interest lawyers, not commercial lawyers. So they used to bring in activists and people, social justice actors, to come and talk to us as a way of teaching us. And so some of the people they brought in were trans people. They brought in, I remember, a transgender man called Pepe Julian Onjima. And when he came and talked about his life and his activism and the work that he was doing in Uganda and the LGBTQ movement in Uganda, I was astounded, right? I was like, oh my God, this is happening in a country like Uganda where such a law just got passed. And so when that happened, I felt inspired to just join the work and join him. But also I was queer, right? And at that age, at that point, you don't even know, because you haven't been raised to think that you even, like, that's an option. Like, living as a queer person is even an option, right? Like, you can't, in the wildest of my imaginations, I didn't see that as a possibility, that I could actually wake up every day in this country and live as a queer person. And so it was just that thing that, it's there, but you just don't give it time. You're like, it's not an option. It can't even be real. It's just a figment of my imagination. So when I saw him and he was speaking, it was like there's this entire movement, an entire community of people that's doing this work. I was like, I found my own. It was like permission for me to live and to exist and to be myself. And so that's when I was like, I'm going to look for these organizations that are doing this work, and I'm going to do this work because it matters not just to me, but to everybody like me. So then that's when I joined an organization called Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum in Uganda. I joined as an intern, and then I never left. I was there for about 5 years. I left as a deputy executive director, and then after that I joined AJWS almost 8 years ago. It's been a journey. So when I joined AJWS, I started as just an in-country consultant. I was in Kenya at that time. I had moved to work in Kenya. I was hired to implement a project in Kenya. I didn't like Kenya. I was there for 2 years, and I cried to AJWS, like, you have to let me go back home. This can't be it. The food wasn't so great. Anyway, so I moved back. And so over the years, I've changed positions from an in-country consultant to the senior program officer leading our sexual health and rights work in the African region, and now to the director for the sexual health and rights department, leading a fantastic team that's working with LGBTQ movements, with adolescent girls and young women movements, and sex worker movements in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and the Caribbean. So that's the work that I do at AJWS, and that's how I ended up joining this work.
Can you tell us a story of impact? Like, what is happening on the ground? What does it look like to be in country working in this kind of work?
First of all, as you've heard, we work with so many movements in so many countries, and these movements have different issues, different priorities, different needs. But what we try to do, and I think Elizabeth sort of touched on this in the introduction, what we try to do is defend people's dignity, really just to make sure that everybody on this earth is living a good and dignified life, right? Like, that's the whole point of this work. And I'll give you an example, and this is a very recent example. Last year, I think all of us know how crazy last year was. So last year, January, stop work orders have come. Resources and service provision, especially around HIV/AIDS programming, is cut abruptly. People are no longer accessing the services that they needed to access. People are no longer accessing the support that they needed to access. And I remember there is a very small group of transgender women living with HIV in Uganda. It's a very small group. It's nothing large, but they were so heavily impacted, right? Because the funding that was cut, the resources that were cut, they supported them to have like weekly support group meetings, because it's important. If you're a transgender woman in Uganda and you're living with HIV, you need that community, right? I think all of us exist with community, especially if you're living in such a difficult context. You need your people, you need your family, you need your community. So those funds were supporting, support group spaces. They were supporting things that look very basic to other people, but they're very needed for this community. That's nutritional support. Like, so every week you go for this support group meeting, you meet your people, you're given nutritional support. It was supporting adherence, because adhering to these drugs is also not easy. It takes a lot of, mental strength and all of that. So all of these structures that had been created through US government support were breaking down, right? But we didn't want them to break down, because again, what we care about is the dignity of the lives of people. And I remember, and how we fund at AJWS is we don't approach this work just as funders, but as comrades, as siblings, as friends, walking this journey together. And I remember sitting with this group and saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that the progress that we had gotten to, the things we had realized are not backsliding? There are things that we have to fight for, that we have to keep. And we had been supporting a network of transgender organizations in Uganda called Trans Network Uganda, and we had been giving them some small grants to do like seed funding to trans communities and trans people. Because as you can imagine, in Uganda, if you come out as a transgender woman, your family is going to disown you. You can't go to school. Nobody's going to employ you. No one wants to rent a house to you. You can't access credit and all of these things. So how do we then make sure that these people are still able to live dignified lives? So we were making small seed grant funding to these communities. And what happened last year when the stop work orders came is that we used those small funds that we had to buy many plastic chairs, right? Like just plastic chairs, very many of them, like 500. And what we did was we started hiring them out. There is a nearby church, so every Sunday they'd come. I don't know if they know that they were hiring plastic chairs from transgender women, but we didn't offer that information, but they would hire them out every Sunday. They give us some funds. We got, people doing events. We'd hire out the chairs. They do events. They bring them back. And we used the money from those plastic chairs to sustain those support group meetings, to sustain the nutritional support, to sustain the adherence work, to continue giving seed funding to these trans women to invest in small businesses so that they can sustain themselves. And for me, that was very, very critical because it was at a time when the world was just in so much confusion. All of us didn't know what was going to happen. And yet we were able to use our support, our work as AJWS to make sure that this very vulnerable and easily forgotten community was not losing out on so much progress that we had got, that they were able to continue living dignified lives, even with everything that was happening in the world and in their community. So that is what we do. We try, like I said, the purpose, the point of the work that we do is to make sure that everybody has a shot in this life on this earth, that they can live dignified lives, whether it's a transgender woman living with HIV in Uganda, or a girl that's getting married off early in India, or activists that can't convene in Nicaragua. We just want to make sure that everybody has a shot. And so that's what we do. I think that's the easiest story that I can give you. I have very many others if you have time.
Oh, I'm here for it. I mean, what struck me was the emphasis of dignity, but also of agency. And I think everything you do sort of has that energy that it isn't missionary work, right? It's an empowerment work. And I'm curious, just like this church might not have known that it's transgender women running this business, do the groups that you're serving know that it's Jews funding the work?
Yes, I think our name gives it away quite easily. When it's American Jew, it gives it away quite easily. They do know that it's Jews that are funding this work. And I think there is a history of Jews funding this kind of work or being supportive of this kind of work. And I think that for a lot of the partners that we work with, the understanding, and it could be wrong, it could be true, is that Jews know the history. They have experienced marginalization and what that means, right? They have lived the reality of what it means for people to other you or to feel like you're not a worthy human being like they are. They know what that looks like. They know what that can lead to. And so that is the connection that our partners and our movements make to the fact that Jews are funding this work. And so for them, it's always a reminder. And I think there's a partner of ours, I think in Kenya, who was, we're having this conversation with them. And they were saying that I think Jews, if we don't learn from the history of what the Jewish people went through and how they learned from it themselves and are pushing for the dignity and respect of every single person on this earth, then I don't know who we will learn from, because they know best what it looks like for us to not respect each other, for us to not respect our differences. And they're trying to teach us and tell us, we know what it is, so listen to us, but we're not listening to them. And so we've had that conversation of, I wish we could listen, because they know and they have lived it, but we're not listening to them. So they know who funds us, and I think they're very happy to learn from the Jews and the Jewish community and Jewish history. And I think the hope is that very many people around the world can learn from this history. And I think a lot of things would be very different today in 2026 if we all could learn from Jewish history and try to live by the ideals that the Jewish community are trying to push, especially through organizations like AJWS.
That's a powerful statement to hear in so many respects, particularly given the current political climate around Judaism and Jewish peoplehood. Elizabeth, I'm curious. I mean, you're a devout Jew. You're a dedicated educator in the Jewish world and also been committed to a lifetime of justice work. How is your Judaism personally interacting with this dignity and right to just world for all people? How does that work? And then also, why does American Jewish World Service care about people that are not Jews? Like, why does it matter?
I think my call to this work comes from having grown up in a very strong Jewish community, but also in a place where there was a very large immigrant population and a large Jewish population. And for whatever reason, I gravitated more towards the immigrant families who were not Jewish than to the Jewish families growing up. And I think it was connected to the recency of my own family's history as immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. My parents were first generation American, and I felt very connected to the experience of having to leave somewhere that you loved or that you wanted to be to start over somewhere else, and could just see I had such a wonderful childhood. I was a suburban New Jersey girl, but my life got blown open by these friendships with kids who were first generation themselves, who invited me into their worlds. And I got to eat the food, and I got to attend religious ceremonies and cultural ceremonies and eat with their families, and they would bring me to extended family gatherings. And the world felt so much bigger to me than it could have as this girl from suburban New Jersey. And it was also very clear to me that there were, even in my world, although I wouldn't have described it this way at the time, the Jewish community had more in terms of resources than my other friends. And it affected where some kids were able to go to college. It affected all sorts of things about people's lives. And I really have taken that awareness with me on many levels into the professional work that I do. And as a rabbi, I feel like I actually can't, it's an impulse that I can't resist. I feel like I get itchy when I'm just in the Jewish world doing Jewish things. There's this whole world out there that I feel responsible for, specifically as a Jew. And I like to have one foot firmly in both worlds, in the secular world and the Jewish world, and to use Jewish values in service of the wider world. When I'm in any one place too much, I get impatient. I get kind of restless. So there's something about my identity that really seems to pull me across, but then back to integrating those things together. So I would say, in terms of the second question you asked me, Joannine, that was the most beautiful theological explication of our work that anybody could have given.
I know. I was like, tell me more about how great my faith is. I loved it.
That was fantastic. But I would say that really the project of Torah, I think, is about building a society that recognizes what Joannine was saying, the fundamental truth that we are all, every human being, created in the image of the divine. And I know we say that, we throw that term around, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, but what would life really look like if we treated everyone as though we were standing across looking at the divine? So I think the project of Torah is about building a society that recognizes this. And we use the example of the Jewish people's enslavement in Mitzrayim, in biblical Egypt, as an example of what can't happen again, or what shouldn't happen again. We're trying to build a society that is the complete antithesis to this. And there's just nothing untouched by this, which is what I love about Judaism, is that Judaism thinks in obligations rather than rights. So we have these personal obligations that could be about ritual, it could be about how we eat, it could be about how we spend our money, but it's also about having this obligation to build social structures at the highest levels that includes not just where we live, not just our homes, not just our city, not just our country, but really the whole world. There's this wonderful discussion in the Talmud. It has to do with Shabbat, and then the rabbis are sitting around discussing whether animals can go out into a public space on Shabbat with various things tied to them. It's a funny conversation, but the upshot of it is that somebody says, well, one rabbi's cow went out with something tied to it, and that's a bad thing. The rabbi's cow shouldn't have gone out. And the resolution of this conversation is this very strong statement that anybody who can protest against things that members of their household are doing, who are doing something wrong, and they don't do that, they are held responsible for that person's wrongdoing. So it turns out not to have been that rabbi's cow, but it was somebody else's. It was the neighbor's cow, but it was called the rabbi's cow because the rabbi was responsible for not having prevented that from happening. But then it goes on and says the same thing is true of people who live in your city. If you can protest against things people in your city are doing that are wrong and you don't, then you're held responsible. And it ends with this phrase, Kol ha'olam kulo, the entire world. If you are in some way capable of protesting the wrongs that are happening in this world and you don't, you are held responsible. So I think it's a very Jewish sense of obligation. We live in this world. We have an obligation to everybody who lives here. And I always have the voice of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel in my head. He said that morally speaking, there really is no limit to the concern that we're obligated to feel about the suffering of human beings. And he concludes, this is the more well-known piece of what he says, that in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And so I feel responsible as an American, as a Jew, as an American Jew, for what happens and for the welfare of my siblings across the world. And I think it is both a Jewish concern and an American concern, which I can talk about more in a minute if you would like.
You said it just so gently, I think, in this, your rabbinic tenor. And yet I actually think what you're saying is revolutionary. I think that many Jews aspire to believe what you believe and to practice it. And yet our particularism, especially when we're encountering our own danger, and especially in this political moment, that we say, yes, all people, but first ourselves. And it is sort of like a wonderful village-like energy of Jews, right? Like if you're part of this family and you take care of your family first, and whatever's extra sort of goes to other people. And then when we're threatened, I think that circle gets tighter and tighter. And you two work for an organization that actually says the particular is taken care of by many other Jews. So we're going to work towards this aspirational vision of seeing the humanity in all humans. And I'm curious, do you actually think that level is revolutionary, or do you think, oh, come on, this is the job of Judaism. It's to be a force of good in the world. And that's what we're trying to do. Like, yalla, let's go.
I think it's both. But I think Judaism is really realistic. The idea that we start with our inner circle and work out that's just how we work, right? Human beings, we care most. We have particular concern for our family or for our chosen family. And for those people then who are in proximity to us, who we see every day, that's a very natural tendency. And Judaism acknowledges that. But then where I think it is important, it goes further and says, I know you have those instincts, but you also need to think about things that are not right in front of you. And we are all interconnected. So it's like that little extra push to remind ourselves that we should be expanding the circle. And not everybody can or should devote their lives' work to this. It's why organizations like ours exist, so that you have other people doing the research and the work for you. And, you can just get tied in. But I think it is very important to keep that lens broader than just ourselves.
I actually think that it's important for the work to start back at home with ourselves. I actually think that what the binary we have created of home and then elsewhere in the world sometimes even undermines the global solidarity that we need for this kind of work to be as impactful as it could be, right? I think that, imagine if everybody raised their children to believe that every human being is created in the image of the divine. We wouldn't be dealing with a lot of things. So that work has to be at home. I think I do not see our homes and our families and even ourselves as individuals as separate from the rest of the world. I think the problems that we face at a global level do not exist in a vacuum. They're not coming from somewhere weird that's not on this planet. They're coming from individuals, from families, from people we know. The people that are doing the bad things that we are fighting against are people who also come from families, are people who are fathers and husbands and mothers and wives and friends and all of that. So the work at home is actually extremely important to the work that we are doing outside of the home. And to even increase the scale and scale it up, look at what's happening right now with the, neo-Pentecostals and the evangelical movement right now that is doing a lot of damage across the world. In the last couple of years, the damage that they have done on the African continent is just indescribable, right? There's a family values movement. That's what they call it, family values, right? They got the anti-gay law, the new one in 2023 passed. They were proposing it in Kenya. It recently passed in Senegal, in Burkina Faso. It's so much damage that's happened in this country, in our countries. And that work is being pushed from the United States, right? And right now, the people that have been pushing that work outside of the United States are the ones pushing the policies that are breaking the United States apart. Imagine if the people in the US had not simply looked at these people thriving on the African continent and had treated them as a US problem, not just as an African problem, but had said, these are our people, these are Americans, and we need to deal with them here back home. But that did not happen because at that time, they were not in America. They were in Africa. It was a thing of, oh, too bad. We're in solidarity with you, but it's not happening at home. But it now is at home because that's what happens when you allow evil to thrive anywhere in the world. It's always just a matter of time before it is in your home. So we should not create that binary of there is home and there is elsewhere, because elsewhere is home and home is elsewhere, right? We always need to remember that whatever is happening elsewhere is going to come to your home, because elsewhere is someone else's home. Like the rest of the world is not just this big vacant piece of land. It is someone else's home, right? It's just not your home, but it also is someone else's home that elsewhere in the world. And the moment we allow evil to thrive in other people's homes, it's just a matter of time, because our homes are not as exceptional as we think they are, right? They're not as immune as we think they are. These things will come and find us. And I think if the last couple of years has taught us anything, is that this can happen to anybody. So we need to own the work that AJWS does as all of our work. And I love what you have said, Rabbi Elizabeth, when you say that if you can't protest what's happening in your home and you don't, you're held responsible. I need that on a t-shirt, because there's so many people I need to hold responsible. But thank you so much for saying that, because I think it does validate the need for the global solidarity that all of us need, the need to understand that the problems that are happening are all of our problems, and we need to treat them as such and approach them as such, that they're all of our problems. They're not Miriam's problem. They're not AJWS's issues. They're our issues as human beings on this earth. That's what I wanted to add.
Absolutely. I love that global solidarity. Again, aspirational. And also, if we don't have that, then what are we doing? It reminds me, recently, I had the gift of being with AJWS in the Dominican Republic. And there were so many beautiful stories of impact of watching women and children and finding agency and strength and just the true wonder of the work. But I think my favorite moment, we went with Ruth Messenger, who is one of the queens of American Jewish World Service. I'd say she's a rebbe, a heroine, a political activist. She's all of the things. Badass is probably the best name that she has. I think we were plenty of us in middle age and younger, and Ruth had a few more years on us, and she was faster than all of us. And there was this moment we walked, you're laughing, Joannine, because we get off this bus in a small village or town, and these women came and met us, and Ruth embraced them together, and they had this moment, and Ruth just sort of gently turns back to us, as gentle as Ruth is, and says, we're just two old women doing the same work for 30 years. And she said it with total joy, because I think I would have said it with here we are 30 years later doing the same damn work. And actually it's worse. It's worse now than it was when they started the work. But the power of two global citizens or two different sort of works of life still committed to this work was transformative to witness. And I'm curious, is that true for you too? How do you sort of keep going when the work continues to be difficult and our country as the United States continues to be a large part of the problem or the problem? What is that like for you?
It's exhausting. I was telling Elizabeth yesterday that I'm just going to fight to record this podcast and put on a face that doesn't make me look as exhausted as I feel right now. I think it's we have to acknowledge how exhausting it is, especially the last couple of years. So many things have happened, one after another. We have, we're in deep pits of despair and hopelessness and just deep exhaustion, and not just physical exhaustion, but just that emotional, mental exhaustion. And right now we're at a point where a lot of the things we're doing is just sheer strength and survival and not resilience. And that's just the reality of the movements that we work with. In Uganda right now, for example, in addition to everything else that's been happening, we just got a law that was recently passed called the Protection of Sovereignty that basically regulates foreign funding and prohibits funding the kind of work that AJWS funds in the country. And then before you know it, there's an Ebola crisis. So all of these things just keep happening, and they exhaust you as a person. But I think, and honestly, and I always say this, that I don't think there is one thing that keeps me going as much as community does, right? Just having community, because we all get tired. We're human, right? We all get tired. There are days when I wake up and I just want to put my hope down. I can't afford to hope anymore. And there's someone else that's going to pick it up for me and hold it for me until I'm ready to take it up again. And so that solidarity, it's even much better when it's global solidarity. I think for me, even sitting on a podcast like this, that's for an audience in the US and not Uganda, knowing that as a queer woman in Uganda that's facing so much oppression and so much repression, there's people in the US rooting for me that will wake up and care about the fact that I'm living, gives me so much hope. But also it allows me to put my tire down when I really cannot carry it anymore. And that is needed for the work that we do, especially in these times. We do need to be able to put everything down and breathe in and breathe out. But if you don't have people to carry it for you when you put it down, that becomes dangerous. So for me, that's the importance of solidarity. Just knowing that when things get really bad, there's an entire community in the US or in the UK or in France that are rooting for me. People that wake up and earn their money and give it to AJWS because they want this queer woman, Joannine, in Uganda to have a good life. That is so life-changing and so life-giving, right? So even us out here, we cannot afford to give up on that cause because we have so much people that are counting on us, that are investing in us, that are hoping with us, and really just, just expecting with us. And so that, for me, that is really what keeps us moving. It's what keeps our movements going because we are living in very difficult contexts and working in really, really difficult contexts. So knowing that we have a huge, strong support system out there that we are not even aware of. Very many queer people in Africa don't know that I'm here talking about them and sharing examples to people that I don't know that are going to hear about it and maybe be moved to do something. That is incredible. So for me, that is one of the things that keeps me moving, having community, knowing that I can afford to put it down and someone takes it up, but also knowing that I'm not in this alone and we are hopping together, we are pushing together, we are counting on each other together. But also just the fact that, this is a fight for lives, right? This is not work we do just, for rainbows and giggles and, feeling good, but this is people's lives. We are literally fighting for our lives out here. So that keeps us going because then what's the option, right? What's the other option if we don't keep up the fight? We give up on our lives and we can't do that. So this is a fight for our lives. This is work we do for us to be able to literally live and exist. So for us, for people like me, it's not entirely an option to say it's become too difficult, we can't do it. We do have to do it because that's the only way we live. That's the only way the world goes. But also we just have a moral obligation to ourselves and to future generations to live a world that's better than, the one we found. It's becoming a bit difficult these days. But here's to hoping that we will be able to achieve that. So yeah.
I love that. Here's to hoping. I think that's sort of what we are left with, that if you stop the work, then it will never get done. And so you have to hope at least this part. When you talk about community, I love the sort of connected chain of our communities together in our investment, in our hope for you, in our advocacy. We say words like Tikkun Olam, healing the world, or we say B'Tselem Elohim, made in the divine image. I think that we throw these terms around and then actually forget that that's a muscle that needs to be worked. But I'm curious, Joannine, what is the work of accompaniment of the grassroots partners?
How we define that is that we are more than a funder. And I think I say this, that we are more than a funder as AJWS. We do much more than we've given you money to do work. And one of the ways in which that is done is we have country-based staff members like me, all right? People that are from the movement. I am from the Ugandan LGBTQ movement. My partner is from the Kenyan LGBTQ movement. So when I'm engaging with these movements, I am not a donor. When we say AJWS is funding queer people in Uganda, I am the queer people in Uganda that AJWS is trying to work for, right? So our model of having country-based staff, people from the movement, makes it so that then the work we do is much more than money. So when we say we accompany our partners, is that we're on that journey with them. We'll sit with them and strategize together. We will sort out their problems together. We will sit in organizational disputes together. We will think of solutions together. How we look at our work is that it's like a potluck where everybody is bringing something to the potluck, right? We just happen to have the money, but really we're just another actor in the space and in the conversation. I'll give you an example if you don't mind. Recently, when again, the stop work orders, oh my goodness, I feel like all our work is now revolving around 2025. But when those happened, very many specialized clinics were closed, right? Very many what we call key populations in HIV programming. So like transgender women and men who have sex with men and sex workers and persons who use and inject drugs. they had their own clinics. The reason they had their own clinics, one, is because of the stigma they're going to face at different like government health facilities, but also because they're communities that need their own outreach methods. You need to be able to go to sex workers, find them at what we call hotspots, get them to come and take their medication, make sure they're using, protection in their work and all of that. So they had their own clinics. Of course, when this happened, the clinics were closed. And so we had to sit with our partners and say, what are we going to do? The clinics have been closed, and truthfully, AJWS or any other private foundation or public foundation cannot fill the gap that the US government has left. Nobody's going to be able to do that. So what do? We don't usually fund HIV service provision. That's not usually the work that AJWS funds, but it's important to our movement. So we can't sit by and say, oh, well, that's not really something we fund, but we wish you luck, love and light, right? We couldn't say that. So we had to pivot our resources and sit and say, okay, what are we going to do? This has hit our movement. Our people need to survive. We still need the services and the medications and everything. But we also know the challenges that are going to come with these populations being required to go to public health facilities, like government-run health facilities, to get these services. So we sat and said, let's come up with ideas. We sat with our partners in Kenya. We sat with a group in Kenya at the border of Kenya and Uganda. We call it a hotspot because there are so many sex workers there. There are so many long truck distance drivers and all of that. So we sat with our partner and we said, you know what we could do? We could go and talk to one of the government health facilities, and they allow us to put that shipping container in their compound, and we repurpose it into an office space. And the purpose of that is, one, our people will feel safe because we will be there. They will feel safe. We will still be collecting data and documenting data, but also it's a safe space for our people. Sex workers are a very vulnerable, community and population. Many of them, they move a lot. So many of them come to the border to work, but that's not where they live. So they just rent small rooms where they do their work. So those that are on HIV medicine, you need to move with a book and your medication in the bottle. But when you put it in that small room where you take your clients, when the clients see it, they start assuming that you want to kill them. You want to infect them with HIV. We've lost so many sex workers to that kind of violence. So what our organizations and clinics were doing, they were creating that space for sex workers. You come in the morning, you take your medicine, you keep your book and your medicine there, then you go to your room and do your work. But when these clinics are, that seems like something very small, but it's extremely important because, again, we have lost sex workers because they had nowhere to keep their medicine and their clinic book. And so we said, let's just go and negotiate and see if we can get space to have that container so that it can act. It's not a clinic, but it's there. And so we went, myself and my other colleague in Kenya, also called Elizabeth, we had to sit in those negotiation meetings, talk to the government, draft the MOU ourselves, write everything, do the back and forth, negotiate again, go back. Dealing with governments is hard. Go back, negotiate until right now we have our space there. It's fully functioning. And now the Kenyan government is using that as an example to benchmark what integration of health services could look like without the US government support. And for us, that's very important. So that is not work that we would usually fund, but we sat with our partners to say, let's think, what do we do? And we said, okay, this could work. And we were so involved. It didn't matter. Yes, we are the ones who bought the container, but we went to the negotiations. We were on calls with government officials. We drafted the memorandums of understanding with the government health facility. We followed up. We did everything. When they call us directly, but for a lot of funders, that wouldn't happen, right? Why is a government health official calling the funder of the program? But we are not just funders. That's how we accompany our movements. And so it gives us great pleasure to see that parts of the Kenyan government is using it as one of the examples of how we can still make sure that services are continuing even after the US government support has gone away. They're calling it integration. So they're using it as one of the integration models that could work. They're calling it co-location, where we have the government health facility, but we have like a container space for these communities to feel safe and to feel welcome at the facilities. And that's because of the work that AJWS did. So we are very proud of such things when they happen. So that's how we accompany our movement beyond the funding. We are the ones negotiating with these officials. We are drafting the MOUs. We are going back and forth with them. We're on phone calls with them beyond just saying, okay, we're giving you money to buy the shipping container. We do all of that work. So that's how we accompany our partners.
There's so much learning that happens, and that works both ways. Our partners teach us, and there are things that we can teach our partners that we know. And more, I'm seeing that American clergy are also coming with a little bit of a different mindset also. It's like a learning mindset because it's clear that there's no American exceptionalism. As Joannine said, it can happen to anybody. The slide into authoritarianism can happen to anybody. All of these things that we said never here, not possible. They're happening here. And so our clergy and our leaders who are visiting grantee partners, I think, just because of where everybody was positioned in previous years, I think people come naturally with this sense of they're visiting these partners, they're doing wonderful work. How can I help you? How can I go home and do something to help you? And the relationship is now going the other way as well. There's a story from one of our trips when our clergy were visiting a group of trans sex workers, and this happened just after the 2016 election. And I think one of the rabbis said something like, "You've just told us about your incredible work and these really impactful personal stories. How can we go home and help you? What can we do to help you?" And a member of the group said something like, "What do you mean? How can you help us? How can we help you?" You look what's about to happen. And so I think there's a little bit more that humility is really opening up some really gorgeous possibilities because Americans are seeing and American clergy are seeing that we have so much to learn from others who have been in this work for so much longer, from the resilience and the resistance techniques of people who have been fighting, like Joannine described, for years and years and years and years without stopping, right? Who have been in this situation for far longer than us. And we are learning. Americans are learning from that experience. And it's like kind of leveling out the playing fields in a way that leads to greater relationality and greater mutuality. We were always careful. I think we are always careful that nobody's coming in with savior mentality, but you're coming from New York City and visiting the abate, a former sugar plantation in the Dominican Republic. You notice the differences and you have certain opinions about them. But then when you really dig into the relationships and the stories, you're like, my God, this is absolutely, absolutely incredible. And I have so much to learn here. And then we carry those stories back with us, not just the strategies, but the stories. And I have heard clergy talk about how they feel like they have some of these activists that they met with living on their shoulder and really accompanying them throughout their own work and reminding them that they need to be working towards American policies that are supportive of those folks. So I just think that the lines of connection, like Joannine was saying, there are no borders. What happens here goes everywhere. What happens everywhere comes here. There's a saying in our work that when the U.S. sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold, right? And I think it's just been easier, paradoxically, in the last couple of years to just see that that is true. Our partners on the ground are really trying to repair all the destruction and all the mayhem that the United States is causing.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Elizabeth, can you tell us why American Jewish World Service doesn't do work in North America or in Israel-Palestine?
Great question. We work on 3 continents, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. There are many wonderful organizations doing work in North America. There are many wonderful organizations of all different stripes and ideologies doing work in the Middle East. And for us, our power lies in being able to very broadly mobilize the Jewish community around the spiritual concept, really the bedrock idea that we all share, that everybody, as Joannine said, deserves to live a dignified life where they can be who they are and they can reach their full potential. And that where we have the power to do that is where we're doing it now, because we have these trusted 40-year relationships in so many of these places, that we've really grounded ourselves in those places and those relationships, which is not to say there is not work to be done elsewhere. There's plenty of work to be done elsewhere, but there are other organizations that do that. And there's a few, but AJWS is really the predominant organization doing the work that we're doing in the way that we're doing it. And so we like to play in our lane and to be really good at what we do and to really make the Jewish community proud of the work that they have been supporting for 40 years in making all of these things possible.
I totally agree with you, Elizabeth, that we stay in our lanes, and actually the lane is in a space that the Jewish world isn't really focused on, especially in this moment. We're so heightened to think about, well, what about ourselves in North America? There's so much work. There's poverty here. There's dissent and pain all over the Middle East. Like, don't we have those places? And to say, actually, yes, and there's great work, and also there are difficulties all over the globe that we also could be giving our energy to. So, Joannine, can you share with us a particular challenge or particular spot that was painful that American Jewish World Service was working against?
Yeah, I think 2023 was a difficult year, especially in East Africa. African continent basically all over, but because we work mostly in Uganda and Kenya, I think it was such a difficult year. 2023 is when Uganda passed the Anti-Homosexuality Act. It wasn't the first time they were passing it. They passed it in 2013, and we managed to fight it, and we got it annulled in 2014. But in 2023, the Family Values Movement managed to get another Anti-Homosexuality Act passed in Uganda. It's a very draconian law. I'm a queer woman and I could be thrown in jail for life just for being a queer woman, right? Just that's it. It has punishments for the death penalty in various circumstances. For example, if you're in a same-sex relationship with a person with disability, like persons with disabilities can't be queer or they can't be in romantic relationships. The moment you're found in a same-sex relationship with a person with disability, you're open to the death penalty. So it's even the work we do as AJWS, funding LGBTIQ work, is considered promotion of homosexuality, and the punishment for that is 20 years in prison. So it was a very challenging moment, not just for AJWS, but for the movements that we work with, for queer people in the country, because we had worked so much to get to where we were. And that is why for us, 2025 was not the worst year, right? It had been a long time coming. For us, 2025 was like the pinnacle of what had been a very, very strong build-up. So, it was challenging again because we were very deflated. We had fought so much to defeat the first law, and to see that this one was coming up the way it did, even harsher than the one that we fought. So what we did, we worked with our partners to challenge the law, and that case is still in court. We lost at the Constitutional Court. We won some grounds or some provisions like, criminalizing access to health services. There was a crime where if you're a landlord or a landlady and you rent your property out to a person who is queer, who is LGBT, and you don't report them, you find out that one of your tenants is queer and you don't report that to police, there was a crime. So some of those things were removed at the Constitutional Court, and we're glad for it, but the law still stands. But we are still with our partners at the Ugandan Supreme Court, and we're hoping for the best. That same year, we had almost a similar law introduced in Kenya called the Family Protection Bill, because again, all these laws are being pushed by a family values movement that's based in the US. They introduced it in Kenya. We worked with our partners. We are part of a strategic working group representing donors where we've worked with activists for all these years to make sure that that law does not see the light of day. Thankfully, up to now, it still hasn't seen the light of day because we have held the line. We have pushed back using various strategies. Some of them we can't share publicly because they'll find out what we're doing. But we have done so much to make sure that that bill does not see the light of day. And I'm just happy to say that it has not seen the light of day. So 2023 was such a challenging year. And it wasn't just in those two countries. Those bills were springing up all over the continent. And so we started working with an organization in Kenya called SAC, where we are creating a continental movement to push back against this family values movement, because we know the problem is not just for Uganda or Kenya or Ghana or South Africa, it's for the entire continent. And it's a very fabulous movement, and we have disrupted and interrupted their family values conferences, again, using tactics that I can't say publicly, because then they'll know what we are doing. But we have managed to somehow infiltrate their movements and disrupt their activities and slow them down. So 2023 was a very difficult year, but I think, and that goes into the win that you're asking about, the fact that, one, the LGBT movement in Uganda is still standing. We are still challenging that law in the Supreme Court. The one in Kenya has not even been debated by Parliament. We sort of killed it at draft level, and we are hoping it's still there. It doesn't, leave that level. But we have also continued to do various things. We are still trying to get decriminalization of same-sex conduct in Kenya with our partners. That case is at the Court of Appeal. Just this week, the High Court of Kenya ruled and said the government should allow transgender people to change their gender markers on their official documents. just this week, right? Like 2 days ago. So those are some of the wins that really keep us going, to see that all of these things are happening just this week, literally 2 days ago. The High Court said, no, you should allow people to change their gender markers. Nothing should stop them from doing that. It's incredible, right? So that kind of work in the context we are working in for us really, really gives us so much hope to continue going. So it's been a challenging couple of years, but we adapt. We are resilient, but also we are so close to the movements. We're always strategizing together on how to push back and continue holding the line.
Gorgeous. Elizabeth, can you share with me a win or hope in the same kind of energy as Joannine just shared?
I can. Just the last 6 months, when President Trump appointed somebody to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Organizations at the State Department, which is a position that I had not heard of before this, and most Americans hadn't heard of before this, but is actually quite important because it determines U.S. policy at the United Nations, and the person in this position gives direction to some of the biggest and most important U.S. embassies around the country. And the person who was appointed was eminently unqualified for the job, had no background whatsoever, and much more than that, had for years been professing openly white supremacist, racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, transphobic sentiments with no embarrassment about it, and sort of cloaking it in this guise of intellectual, scholarly research and inquiry. And we found out about this because we work with partners who monitor such things. So we always work in coalition. And so there were groups among communities of color who were going to work on opposing the nomination on their end. There were LGBTQI groups who were going to work on opposing it on their end. And then we got called in to be the voice of the Jewish community and attack this issue from the perspective of anti-Semitism. So here's where the relationships come into play. We have this network now of thousands of rabbis across the United States in all sorts of places who we've trained and who have been educated with us and who have traveled with us and studied with us, who are on call. And so I got in touch with colleagues in of all places, the Utah Jewish community, because we determined that this nominee was going to need every single Republican vote from the committee that was judging the nominations. And if we could peel off one Republican, and preferably two, then the nomination would fail. And the most movable senators were in Utah and then elsewhere in Pennsylvania. So I said, who do we know who knows AJWS and loves AJWS and cares about this work and has relationships that are political in Utah? And we found those people. And that set off a chain of months of behind the scenes work of people in the Jewish community picking up the phone and calling the senator's office. And I discovered that somebody else this person knew had a list of like hundreds of Jews in Utah and used that list to mobilize them to make phone calls. And I worked with a woman who used to be a Utah legislator, and she's Jewish. She actually happens to be the mother of a former AJWS staff person who has a very close relationship with that office. And she and I wrote an op-ed, and we published it in the big Mormon newspaper in Utah, calling on the senator, explaining why this was not okay, why this nomination could not proceed. And we talked about the experience of being the target of anti-Semitism. And meanwhile, our partners in other sectors were writing about and speaking about, the racism and the homophobia and doing in their communities what we were doing in ours. And if you ever want to watch kind of a fun hearing, congressional proceedings are often pretty dry, but this was kind of a fun hearing. The Utah senator, in addition to other senators, just lit into this candidate and used some of the material that we had provided to the office when we said, here's what this person said, ABCD, quoted those things back and said, like, what? Explain this to me. And then the moment the hearing was ended, he turned to a reporter in the corridor and said, this guy doesn't have my nomination. And so the nomination effectively died.
Woohoo!
Right? And it died because
amazing.
it's amazing of the relationships that clergy have with their elected officials and the power of the Jewish community who, what senator is getting hundreds of calls from Jews in Utah about a nomination for an obscure State Department position? It really, really mattered. And I really want to give credit to the other communities that were working here because they were doing the same thing in different ways in their own communities. But it's an example of why we do the work that we do in the United States.
I could listen to 10,000 more of those stories. I just feel like the web of connection, and I think we talk about particularism, universalism, this global community, this solidarity, all these things, but to actually hear from the ground up and that our stories and our impact actually matters. And in this moment where so much is not in our control, to actually think slowly it is, if we understand that we're part of a huge community of this work. And so in that spirit of coalition, the people who've been listening to this podcast are probably like, sign me up. Like, I want to go on a trip. I want to do some of that work. And so I want to hear, what can our listeners do? What's the best way we can be impactful in this work? How can we join this coalition?
Thank you for asking, Miriam. If we have clergy out there who are listening, we actually are looking for rabbis to study and travel with us and participate in our Global Justice Fellowship. So the thing you should do is reach out to me. But most people are not Jewish clergy. So for everybody else, please join our mailing list. We will send you action alerts. It's so easy. Often it just involves putting your name on something or sending a pre-written letter to Congress, or occasionally it's picking up the phone. But also come and get educated. There's so much to read on our website. We have wonderful stories that go out every month. We call them Stories of Hope, that tell stories like the ones that we're telling today about successes all around the world. And you get to meet vicariously these incredible activists and organizations doing the work. And we have pictures and video. It's so important to learn. Learning is not to be underestimated, because when you know, that leads to action. As the rabbis say, or hopefully it leads to action. So once you have that information and you're connected to AJWS and to our work, then you'll have opportunities to act. And certainly I would be remiss to say that the reason AJWS can do this work is because we have the backing of the American Jewish community, and that is who is funding all of these courageous activists who are fighting for human rights and teaching us all about these incredible strategies for resilience and resistance. That's happening largely because of the resources and philanthropic dollars that the American Jewish community is making available. So certainly that. But please come get involved and learn. And we have, for educators also, I want to mention, we have many years of resources, both on the website and just in my possession that I can share with you. We have curricula for teaching about global justice. We have holiday celebration rituals. We have Divrei Torah. We have sermon starters for every Torah portion of the year. We have multiple years of Jewish leaders who are writing about the Parsha from the perspective of global justice. So there's really a wealth of resources, and I want everybody to know about them, and I want everybody to take advantage of them.
Fantastic. I think everybody should do everything that Rabbi Elizabeth has said. I think the only thing I'll add really is, let's start, like I said initially, let's do the work at home, in our homes, in ourselves, in our hearts, in our spirits, in our communities. Because again, the people that do the bad things that we are fighting against do not come from us. They're from our homes, they're from our families, from our schools. We go to the same supermarkets as them and use the same trains as them. We don't need heroes in this work. We just need ordinary people doing ordinary things on ordinary days to really change how people experience their lives on a daily basis. So let's not forget to start the work with ourselves, within our communities, within our homes, within our countries. Let's start the work there, because unless we reach each other at an individual level, everything we're going to do, we can get all the best laws we can in the world. But as long as the people we exist with in our communities still hate us, still treat other people as less than, then all those good laws will go to waste. So let us start at home. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to do what Rabbi Elizabeth said. If you see something happening in your home and you don't protest, we will hold you responsible. So let us start there. Let us remember this is about our lives and people's lives. And anyone can do anything to change a life today or tomorrow or every day.
And then I'm in a perfect way to close our conversation. We will be sharing this podcast in the heart of Pride Month. And so to think about activating our moral courage in celebration of Pride, Tzedakah, to give generously to this amazing organization that is doing such profound coalition building. Thank you for your witness, for your stories, for your hearts today. It's been an absolute joy sharing this work with you.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you so much, Miriam.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation and that you'll tune in again in the future. As we close, a couple of quick reminders. Be sure to check the show notes for information about AJWS and their powerful work, as well as the links to the many great things happening at Judaism Unbound. Also, we'd love to encourage you to be in touch with us with any questions, ideas, visions for the Jewish future, or anything else you'd like to send our way. You can be in touch in any of the following ways. First, you can send us a note via Facebook or Instagram. Our handles there are @JudaismUnbound. Second, we'd love you to check out our website, JudaismUnbound.com, where you can find show notes for this episode and all sorts of other juicy goodies. And third, feel free to send me an email at miriam@JudaismUnbound.com. We're also greatly appreciative to anyone who's able to support us financially, and you can do that either on a monthly recurring basis or via a one-time gift by heading to JudaismUnbound.com/donate. Thanks again to all of you out there for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.